again. I'm Maggie Crabtree, your program cowgirl. Earlier you heard a lot of the introduction that I was going to give to you about Chet Caskey. This gentleman came into the Spokane Westerners a while ago, and it's been so much fun to watch all of the things that he's accomplished since I got to know him. He's a retired attorney, a historian, a novelist, a college lecturer. He's written a dozen books. He's a former sheriff of the Westerners Club. And the fun, haunted Spokane has been one of the highlights of his book career, because there are several books where he will give you tours of the haunted places in Spokane. And he's made working at cemeteries fun again. Although I heard that from other cemetery people that work there that they didn't want you to talk about the haunted stuff, but you know, Chet took it and ran with it and made it a lot of fun. So,
ghosts never bothered you, do they? The ghost story?
So, with that, Chet is going to talk to us today about the beginnings of Fairchild Air Force Base. He just finished a book on the history of Spokane that goes from 1800 to the 60s, but he's going to specifically talk to us today about how Fairchild came about in Spokane, Washington. So with that, please help me welcome Chet Caskey.
Do I need this, Maggie? Do I need this?
Yes, you do.
Need this? Yeah. All right, fine. There's deaf people that says me up to my mouth. I would like to say, before I talk about the Air Force Base, Fairchild, I'd like to say right up front that Fairchild's a blessing. Now, I'm a social historian, and I have been since the Dark Ages. That's how I was trained in the middle of the Vietnam War academically. And there's all kinds of ways to view a military base and the military actions of the country you're in. I'm a social historian, and I write, and I've studied and presented things from the public standpoint, non-professional. I dodged the bullet on my lottery number, so I didn't get to go to Vietnam. But my orientation is the people of Spokane, the citizens here, the civilians, the newspapers, the magazine articles about the times that had, the famous politicians that we had that maybe they should be famous if they're not, about Fairchild. And I believe Fairchild has been a blessing historically, despite some problems over time. It's certainly a blessing today. Statistically, 32,000 households in Spokane are associated with Fairchild veterans that either retired here or passed through in their enlistments and then found Spokane so delightful they came back. Spokane, as we'll find out tonight, was not always so delightful. But I think in part, if we take a step back and look objectively, Fairchild is one of the reasons that Spokane is a wedding destination, that we have 2 million visitors to Riverfront Park alone every year, that we have visitors from a handful of foreign countries that really love this the city. And I love it too. I practiced international law for 30 years. I went all over the world to all but one continent, and you can guess what that one was. And Spokane is the nicest city I ever visited. I can say that honestly. Now I'm looking at this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but for 40 years the Journal of Commerce produces every year its book of lists. I love this. I love this. Spokane, I'm looking at the page, this just came a week or so ago to my mailbox, the page that says Spokane County's largest employers. And right at the top of the list, it gives the largest employer of full-time employees in the entire county. That includes Spokane City as well. And right at the top of the list is Fairchild Air Force Base. 7,404 employees as of the middle of last year. The largest single employer in this county, including the city as well. There's a lot of reasons to like Fairchild, but from a civilian standpoint, it hasn't always been roses. Now, I'll say at the outset, and we'll cover that the Fairchild is here 8 miles from Spokane, not because of the desire of the military, and not because of any overt planning and desire on the part of the federal government. Fairchild, as we will see, was located in Spokane, adjacent to Spokane, because of the Spokane civilians. The business community and our elected officials, and some very nice maneuvering and financial arrangements at the last minute, a very exciting story, got the contract to have a relatively small supply base adjacent to Spokane, called the Spokane Depot, Supply Depot. Very small. Right, and finished right before December 7, 1941. Almost overnight, Congress voted to inject, well, the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions by today's standards, and Spokane's little bitty supply base shot up to be one of the most significant air bases on the entire West Coast, as we will see, and that legacy is still here today. I would like to say, too, as we start off, that if, I don't know how many people here were in Spokane in 1961? If you were here in 1961, I think you're going to agree with me that if this crowd was transformed into a time machine back to Spokane in 1961, they would not recognize the city. You might be on Mars. As a matter of fact, when Mel was telling me he was transferred to Fairchild Air Force Base, he came up here in 1971, and the downtown area was like a wasteland. It was all leveled. It was terrible. It's my belief, a very strong belief, that Fairchild, through some negative aspects of Fairchild in the late 1940s and 1950s, brought about directly this change in mental attitude, this orientation of Spokane's civilian and governmental and business community, that something had to change. And it changed for the better, culminating in our 1974 World's Fair. But we'll see that. Now, in the late 1940, as I mentioned before, the Army said that it needed 2 supply bases somewhere on the West Coast. It was a very modest request of Congress. I mean, 1940, there was enmity with Japan, but we weren't at war with Japan. Europe was at war. But on the West Coast, the military, the Army decided it and asked Congress for a very small outlay of money. That was a base, though, and it was highly contested in Congress of just where that would be. The 2 states with the political oomph to garner these supply bases were California and Washington. And that's because we had powerful senators and representatives there. So Washington was in it for the competition to have a supply base that was to be built in 1941. But we had some problems here in Spokane. And the problem was Washington's 2 senators at that time came from Tacoma and Everett. That was their hometown. And right there in that area was already a big, powerful military complex. A naval base and submarine base in Puget Sound. Also one of the largest air bases in the West Coast was in the Seattle area. So they had oomph, and they had the supply base was to be a Army Air Corps endeavor, and they had some real competition here. And we had some clever people. I'm going to see if I can read my own. Our 5th District Congressman at the time was Charles Levy, and he was our congressman for the 5th District that had been pretty conservative over time. One thing they all have in common, regardless of their political orientation or party, they have fought like the Dickens to maintain Fairchild Air Force Base and increase it. That is the one thing that's not negotiable in this city, and we're thankful for that. Our first advocate was Charles Levy from the Fifth Circuit here, and also the mayor of Spokane at the time was very important for this proposal. They had feedback from Washington. House of Representatives are the money organization. The Senate has to approve it. We have some problems. There's feedback to the city and to our mayor and to our city council and also our business community. Things are not looking good. It looks like the base is going to be on the West Coast, on the west side as it goes. So right when the vote was about to be taken, the decision was be taken, our mayor at the time and the business community heads here in Spokane, they raised, did I mention that here, $125,000 in 10 days, donations. And 8 miles west of Spokane on a very level piece of the Spokane Prairie, actually where the Battle of Spokane Prairie was fought in 1758, they bought a whole bunch of acres, I mentioned it up here, 1,400 acres, and gave it to the federal government. They just turned it over in a little ceremony here and said, we give this to you. That coup undercut the West Side and all the machinations they had done, and the military then had a green light, and Congress said, well, if they're going to give us the land, it's got to be in Spokane. That was the first of several very important developments in the history of Fairchild here as well. Now, during World War II, I mentioned that right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, suddenly the Congress and the Army Air Corps, they thought that this little supply base with an airfield in Spokane had great potential and great need here as well. And also very important here were the dams that were completed or nearly completed on the Columbia River, supplying a lot of electricity, which was critical for the production of aluminum, all seemingly centered in the greater Spokane area. A lot of coincidences here. So suddenly Congress put literally hundreds of millions of 1941 dollars into turning this small Spokane supply depot airfield into a huge base, and it was huge. Spokane's the B-17 bombers, they were manufactured in Seattle, but the engines of damaged B-17s and B-17 engines that weren't working right, they were transported to Spokane all through the war. And Spokane specialized here at what would become Fairchild. It was the Spokane Supply Depot, then the Spokane Air Depot was renamed, was right here. Now that was a big operation. A B-17 was a big plane, is the few that's left, and they've got 4 gigantic engines. And so the employment of mechanics was from Spokane, and 5,000 people worked there. 25% of which were women because of the war effort, and they worked all through the war here at Fairchild, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 3 8-hour shifts. The influx of workers here in Spokane for this manufacturing area concern, they actually were responsible for the creation of numerous neighborhoods in Spokane and around Spokane, Airway Heights, Audubon Park. You'll notice the World War II vintage houses around there, very small and modest. Big overflow there. Of course, Baxter, the decision was made because of Fairchild to locate one of the largest military hospitals for the treatment of injured men and women in the South Pacific in the war effort at what was called Baxter Air Base, a huge medical facility here as well. Because of Fairchild, because of Baxter, because of the repair efforts that were done here, in Spokane over the war. The decision was made by the United States government to finance two huge aluminum plants here, utilizing the electricity from the dams on the Columbia River. And one was located north of Hillyard, the other one's in Spokane Valley, the rolling facility there. And that produced huge amounts of aluminum that was needed for ships on the Columbia River. Vancouver was a huge shipyard as well, not too far from here, utilizing its own electricity supply and also aluminum that was manufactured 24 hours a day here in Spokane. So it became very, very big and intensive all through World War II. Now, some of these activities in Spokane during World War II was basically a military base. All branches of the service had sizable facilities here, training facilities here. The railroad was very, very important as transporting the materials to and from Spokane. Spokane was a staging area for a few troops, but mostly supplies here too. And there were guards everywhere. The train facilities and train yards, they were security risks, of course, in World War II, so there were armed guards everywhere. Now, at the end of World War II is when our modern era of Spokane's Fairchild begins. And in 1947, the Spokane Air Depot, as it was called at that time, became a part of the Strategic Air Command of the United States. Now, this was not by an accident. This was because Spokane's Fairchild Air Force Base had bloomed and got so extremely large during the World War II effort. It was a large base. It was an important base in the western United States. And the United States developed the atomic bomb. And Spokane was selected in 1947 and 1948 as one of the, I believe, 13 centers in the United States and its possessions that would house atomic weapons and bombs. Special facilities were made in Fairchild for that, for the bombs to be done, and the federal government decided to make Spokane a very important offensive nuclear bombing facility with bombers. There's a General Fairchild there. It was named after that. The base has gone through several names and variations of names, but finally reverted to Fairchild Air Force Base. There he is. He's a good-looking military man. Now, there is a difference between Geiger Field and Fairchild Air Force Base. In the war years, in the post-war years, our main airport, of course, was downtown. That was transferred to an area adjacent to the Fairchild Air Force Base up there. That's Geiger, the Geiger Field, and there's a history of Geiger Field. Now, I'm going to go fairly rapidly through my PowerPoint here, but it is every slide on my PowerPoint. It's got 41 slides, which makes it a little difficult to make a brief presentation with that many slides, but they're all captioned, and they're all available to all of you. If you would like the complete PowerPoint with the captions, the history of Fairchild, pick up a card here from Cathy. After the talk, shoot me an email that you'd like a copy, and I'll send it to you by email. Here's the statistics here. Spokane's International Airport has a 14,000 foot runway, and the military's, where did I get the specifics here? Maybe elsewhere in here as well. The military has its own airfield, its own towers, its own. Almost immediately, now this is not, as has been pointed out, and I am totally in agreement, these incidents that happened in the 1950s and 60s were of two varieties. the negative instance. First of all, employee-wise, that's going to drop off, because these are not going to be the manufacturing days during the 1950s and the early 1960s. These are going to be military days. And military groups are going to be assigned to them, and it's going to be transferred, of course, to the Air Force as well. So Fairchild, for that limited period, and there's no retirement here in the 50s and 60s, is a military base. And it's a military base that observes military protocol. And, well, my wife Cathy was at England Air Force Base during the Vietnam War. It is a fact that anytime that the country's at war, there is, especially in the context of air base, there is a huge number of planes that leave and land and are part of the training mission as well, and accidents occur. Now that's the military side of the equation. On the civilian side, it is not that frequent that very large Air Force bases, especially those selected for the special mission of nuclear war, is located this close to a major civilian city such as Spokane. And we're going to see how that shook out in the 50s and the 60s, not with regard to the military. Fairchild's been through 4 major war periods in the United States, but with regard to the civilians, the people that lived here, the children that went to school here, and people that got jobs and maintained their jobs here. So in the 50s, we're going to see a huge variety of collisions and crashes and explosions that happen around the city that are attributable. A few of the wrecks happen in Fairchild, but are attributable to the first major cause of Spokane's problems with Fairchild, and Fairchild's bad press. It got some very bad press in the 1950s, and that was some mistakes on operation of a command basis. Fairchild did make some mistakes. 1951, the first DC-47 crashed on Mount Spokane, killing the crew. Well, that made news. But the spectacular crashes embracing aircraft mishaps would continue for the next 40 years. But I'm going to concentrate on the 50s and 60s here. Now, we had, most of you are familiar with the B-29s. Those are the ones that had the ultimate bombing of Japan. The very, very huge planes, propeller-driven planes with 4 engines. Fairchild, it was a nuclear bomb facility, and Fairchild was first equipped with B-29 Superfortress. They were loaded with nuclear weapons. They were kept on constant alert. And it's important to understand that Fairchild was never a defensive base. Fairchild was equipped by the U.S. Army, followed by the Air Force, as an offensive base to do strike capabilities on the Soviet Union and China. So the B-29 Superforces there were subject to be loaded with nuclear weapons at Fairchild, and in the event of war, take off and bomb Russia and China. There was some B-29 crashes in November 47. The first of 2 B-29 Superforce nuclear-equipped planes crashed, and they were stationed at Fairchild. The first north of Hillyard, just north of Hillyard, it crashed, and the second exploded at Fairchild Air Force Base upon takeoff in 1951. Now, the militaries did not have a very good liaison with the civilian population in the 1950s, that we will see. And that was doubly true or triply true in Spokane, where we had newspaper investigative news reporters, we had questions to the mayor, we had news conferences. They were constantly, with these huge crashes of these gigantic airplanes, asking Fairchild what happened, demanding that our elected representatives find out what happened. And the almost universal response from Fairchild is no comment. Now, in 1951, a huge fleet of huge propeller-driven and oddly named B-36 Peacemakers, I don't know why they did that, nuclear bombers arrived at Fairchild. They took over the 29s. This was a huge fleet, and it was a peculiar plane. It had the propellers actually behind these huge expansive wings there. All through the 1950s, but particularly during the Korean War, in the early part of the 1950s, the belief was, this was the pre-missile age, the belief was that United States enemies would send bombers to bomb Fairchild, bomb our Air Force facilities. Believe it or not, in 1951, we still had 300 civil defense officers in Spokane that kept 24 hours a day watch at watchtowers all around Spokane and near Fairchild. These are civilian workers with binoculars to report any unusual aircraft approaching Fairchild so they could be alarmed. So the whole city was kind of on alert during the Korean War. In 1951, after the B-29 Superforce crashed at Fairchild Air Force Base, two other separate B-36 Peacemaker bombers crashed at and around Fairchild the same year, including one spectacular collision of one of these huge Peacemaker B-36s that crashed at Fairchild. But the explosion, it was fully loaded with, gladly, not nuclear weapons. The explosion was so violent it rocked windows in downtown Spokane, and you could hear the explosion down there. And when people looked up, 8 miles away, there was a huge, huge black cloud showing from Fairchild there. The question is, of course, what's happened? The answer is no comment. On April 15, 1952, a third B-36 crashed and burned at Fairchild as well. Another one crashed it. This one took out several hangars and several B-36 bombers that were lined up as well. Now, on March 29, 1954, the fourth and final crash of a B-36 occurred at Fairchild while practicing takeoffs and landings. It killed 7 of the 10 crew. I frankly don't know how the 3 crewmen survived. And this was the last B-36 crash before they were removed and replaced by B-52 bomber fleets. These are the huge bombers that are still in use today, I think to some extent. They have huge wingspans that are, correct me if I'm wrong, Mel, but I think they're 65 feet long wingspans. They're huge.
The B-36 was actually bigger than the B-52.
These are very, very big planes. Feet.
I can't remember.
I said feet, yards. 65, I'm sorry, 65 yards.
36 was the maintenance
Now, the 1956, by 1956, this huge jet-propelled bomber for the first time, that was designed to load and deliver nuclear weapons abroad, was here. They were called the Superfortress, the B-52. They were housed in Fairchild, and they were for a long, long time here. The B-52s just eclipsed all other aircraft in Spokane with terrible incidents that happened with the B-52s. First, as you may know, B-52s were in the air from Fairchild 24 hours a day. They were in the air on their way to potential offensive strikes, and then they'd be called back on the fail-safe, and the next 8-hour crew would get, was it 8 hours or 10 hours that they were up there?
They had a constant rotation 24 hours a day.
24 hours a day. The B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons are in the air, So on December 12, 1957, I think the first B-52 crashed crashed there, and eight of the crew members died. That was a spectacular crash. When the B-52 crashes, you know that something wrong has happened. It is a huge explosion. It is a huge explosion. The question on these B-52 crashes were, did they have nuclear weapons aboard? No comment. Now, on September 8, 1958, an almost unbelievable event happened. Two B-52 huge bombers flying out of Fairchild crashed head-on over Airway Heights and collapsed, killing everybody, and one guy on the ground, and a lot of property damage at Airway Heights. Head-on collision of two B-52s, a spectacular explosion. No comment. They cleaned it up. By the way, you cannot, you know, that you sue the military only with the government's permission. Yes?
I'm retired FA, Spokane International, and I heard this story the whole time, you know, and I was in the restaurant eating lunch one time where the accident actually had happened in Airway Heights, and they were telling us that that's when they redirected the route to Fairchild for the planes so they wouldn't go over the business.
Well, at least not go over Airway Heights. That premeditates how an air traffic controller would allow two B-52s to be on the same flight path. But well, I'm speaking, preaching to the choir there. There was another B-52 plane crash in 1960. Here's actual photographs of the crash and explosion, big explosion and crash here. This is all in the Spokane areas on airway approaches to Fairchild. Usually to the north, sometimes we will find out right over the populated area here. September 1962. That's 4 years, I think, after the big Air Force KC-135 refueling planes had arrived there, and eventually that will become the mission of Fairchild after the B-52s are removed. But these are huge tanker aircraft that are full of fuel. They're full of aircraft fuel. And when they crash, and we've had multiple of them, that is a big deal. You know, that's like Mount St. Helens for a few minutes. It crashed on Mount Kit Carson. That's adjacent to our Mount Spokane, and on a elevated approach to Fairchild there. It killed 44 people in that crash. On January 20, 1966, a second crash of a KC-135 occurred actually on Mount Spokane, killing 9. Now, the 9 would be the crew. The 44 in the refueling thing would be the crew plus civilians. Now, Fairchild had bad press until the B-52 bombers were removed started in March 1994. So they're going to be there a long time. And there were incidents like this that really shook up, and their headlines in the Spokesman Review and the Chronicles, civilian people are very, very upset. They're upset about Fairchild, all these planes crashing. In the 1980s, the story leaked that a nuclear bomb dropped from the loading cradle of a B-52 at Fairchild and actually, get this, rolled down the tarmac. The airmen had to run after it and secure this huge bomb, this huge nuclear bomb here, and a lot of questions were done. I mean, the Air Force didn't say, well, yeah, but it wasn't triggered or some stuff like that. Who knows? You could throw on a bonfire and it wouldn't go off, you know, all the normal stuff, but they didn't. No comment. Now, this takes the cake, and this really challenges the command structure, not just the operational structure at Fairchild. And I apologize if this strikes too close to home to individuals that may have known Lieutenant Colonel Holland. He was at Fairchild quite a bit. He was a B-52 pilot. And he was also, I leaned out in my classes and in my books to say, he was arguably insane. He had got to a very responsible position as a B-52 pilot. and he was dangerous, he was undisciplined, and he did multiple tactics. I cannot even believe this as a civilian, with a B-52 bomber, with the 68-foot, or 68 meters, yard airspan. Here, just some of them I mentioned. And I do think that he had personality problems before he finally crashed his B-52 and killed himself and his whole crew. This is his ultimate crash here. They actually had pictures of it because he crashed at an air show. He crashed at an air show and doing a prohibited tight turn around the tower at the air show, thousands of people watching down there, and actually threw his B-52 into a stall. Now, some of you may be a pilot. How can you throw a B-52 into a stall and lose control of it? Not easy. I guess technically it's a stall. Now, Holland on several occasions he's a lieutenant colonel, he flew his B-52 100 feet off the ground. He's skimming treetops. And he did once, when there's a camera crew from a local television station on one of the hills around Spokane, he buzzed him at 100 feet. They freak out completely. And when his crew, his second in command is saying, pull up, get out of here, he chastises them and curses them for their cowardice. On another occasion,
Excuse me for interrupting. What caused the crash, I read part of the report on it. See that picture on the left there? He was going into a bank trying to talk about it, thought he was flying on fire. And he straight up and down, north and south. He lost air. He had no left. And he was trying to make that bank, and he lost.
there he goes. Well, on another air show, when they were doing a change of command at Fairchild, he buzzed where all the officials were standing and the officers. Again, at 100 feet, as to be cute, I guess. He was never disciplined. He was not even chastised, as it was. But he was in charge of this as well. Never reprimanded, never once in his discipline as well. Now, on June, where do I mention here? In this same area, the 1980s, I believe, his wife, he lived in the city, and he was married and he had children. He had a daughter that played softball in the softball team here, a children's team, and they were playing one Saturday afternoon at a ball field, a softball field. This is a girls' softball game, 2 teams. In Spokane, in downtown Spokane, I say downtown, probably on the north side there, and he, in charge of his B-52, decides it would be cute if he buzzed the field where the children were playing. He's dad, that's my daughter, that's dad up there. He buzzes, I think he's about 1,200, 1,500 feet. He starts to buzz, and he does throw his plane into a stall when he tries to pull up too briefly, and it starts, you know what they do, they spin around here. He barely gets control of the plane before it hits the ground. By then everyone's screaming and running, they're terrified, and he pulls it out just by a miracle and flies off. No discipline there as well. Yeah, I asked Mel, I'm glad Mel told us this, I find it unbelievable that a B-52 bomber could be in this posture. How can it ever be in this posture unless the North Vietnamese had just shot it down?
Well, what happens there, Chet, he's vertical like that, and he had no lift to hold him up, the wings hold him up like that, but his wings are starting to flip over upside down, and that's what broke him down. But right there, you can see he had no lift. And
it's at an air show, everyone's watching. Now, here's a trigger warning. I'm going to talk about nuclear missiles and Fairchild. If you're of the squeamish, nobody in here is squeamish. You've been warned. There were crashes, that was upsetting. There was no comments, that was upsetting. The B-52s were upsetting to the civilian population here. I mentioned that Spokane was one of the Deep Creek, at the end of the Deep Creek runway at Fairchild was built a state-of-the-art depot for nuclear weapons, it's still there. It's still there. Whether it's active or not is completely unknown. This picture on the left is not a nuclear storage facility. There are no pictures that have been available to the public of the nuclear storage facility bunker at Fairchild. Fairchild in the 1990s, the military just clamped down. No more information about nuclear weapons at Fairchild. But today, the airmen at Fairchild are still have to be trained and certified to handle nuclear weapons. So we don't know what the deal is here. But in the 1950s, I'm sure everybody here remembers that. I certainly remember that. Is that there were in Spokane duck and cover drills for children. The siren would run and we would duck and cover. There were in Spokane adult duck and cover drills as well for nuclear war as well. And in 1957, the school board in Spokane said, forget it, we're not going to get kids diving under the desk anymore. That's too upsetting. We're just going to get them and march them away to some basement. I don't know. Now, one of the huge public relations mistakes that was made by the Fairchild Air Command was that, this is almost unbelievable, September 18, 1953, the Spokane Chamber of Commerce has one of its monthly huge luncheons where the business and government, just like this, except very much larger. There are all the communities there, and Fairchild has asked to send a representative. And they send Major Cortland Sawtell. And when he gives his speech to the assembled business and governmental communities and newspaper reporters here in Spokane, he says that Spokane is a quote, primary target for World War III. We're within the top 10 targets, he says, to be nuclear bombed in World War III from Russia. We know this, he says. The military knows this. I only practiced law 30 years, but I don't know why in the world you would tell a civilian population that. Even if it was true times 10, even if they were on the front line, even if they were number one, that they were going to be bombed number 10. This is very, very upsetting to the city. And already there's real problems on what to do with Fairchild. There's nothing to do with Fairchild. Fairchild's out of civilian hands now. There's no civilian workers to speak of at Fairchild at this juncture. And Spokane was, by the way, a nuclear #1 target in the Cold War. And we know this because in 1990, when the Soviet Union records were all declassified, here's a picture of Spokane County that's in Cyrillic that was supplied to its own bomber groups. And all of this is in Russian. It's on the internet, but kind of blow out. You can see your neighborhood in Russian Cyrillic. Then in April 26, 1954, Fairchild held a nuclear war audition, so to speak, and 11,000 workers in downtown Spokane had to get out and flee somewhere. This was before aircraft shelters were built downtown. But the spokesman said, Fairchild's spokesman said, oh, this is great. If this 11,000 left at 9 o'clock in the morning after they got to work, he said, if this actually had been hit by a nuclear bomb, well, 8,000 people would die. How ridiculous was that? There were 160,000 people in the city limits at the time of this drill. And in June 15, 1955, Fairchild had an attack readiness drill, which is kind of important historically to show you the orientation of Fairchild, in which they completely evacuated everybody from Fairchild and Fort George Wright and transported them out of the city to a safe place. Nothing about downtown. This was just the military got out as well. Now, the real serious problem to Spokane's bleeding ulcers came on May 28, 1958, when it was announced the first of several small bases that were built around Fairchild, armed with Nike Hercules missiles. Now you can see these missiles, they're long gone now, they were declassified in 1962, but how they look, do I have another picture? Yeah, you know, outside military bases today, outside of VFW halls, American Legion halls, they'll often have an old Nike Hercules missile. These were anti-aircraft missiles that maybe could be used as an anti-missile missile as well, but they were in silos around, how many did I say? 9, I think. 9 missile bases around Fairchild, and each of these bases had 6 Nike Hercules missiles, and they were nuclear tipped. And they were designed to hit incoming Soviet Union and China planes with a nuclear load. You didn't have to hit them exactly, hit them near that. The nuclear bombs are going to explode. Now, what was explained to Spokane's public is this was not to protect Spokane from an attack. There were none of these missiles directly around Spokane. They ringed Fairchild. They were to protect Fairchild. It was our first and only defensive missile strategy. And when the public was very, very upset, wanted to know about the nuclear-powered missiles now you are putting near our city, a government spokesman said, well, that's fine. He says the incident of these Nike Hercules missiles exploding near public places is, quote, extremely rare, end quote. We could all sleep a little better then. Oh, there were 4 missile launch sites as well. Now, then came, in 1959, it was announced that construction started earlier that, the really hysteria-causing announcement in Spokane. And that was the federal government. This had nothing to do with Fairchild's command structure. The federal government had announced that Spokane would be the site of 9 offensive intercontinental ballistic missile sites. 9 in Spokane, in a ring around Spokane, and they would be the first line strike firing these huge missiles, intercontinental, that would go over to whatever, Moscow, Peking, or whatever. And they were, these missile sites ringed Spokane here. Not only were they deadly, they were offensive. Their weapons meant to fire you know, immediately, because we're entering now the missile age in '59. These missiles were on alert. Sometimes twice a week, were loaded full of fuel and elevated with sirens and floodlights in the middle of the night. And it was never announced, or day, it was never announced when there would be alerts. Even the crews didn't know if it was a real thing or just a trial. And this really freaked out civilians in Spokane. You'd be asleep at 3 in the morning and the sirens would occur, and then beyond the trees you'd see a missile rising up, these huge intercontinental missiles with floodlights and sirens there. That really upset their sleep. This was really, really upsetting, and we had congressmen at the time, a particularly horrible congressman from the 5th District, Walt Horan. He was very much anti-communist, and he was very much in favor of nuclear weapons at Spokane. So he constantly was making these press releases like, oh, this is good, we'll get them first before they hit us, all that kind of stuff. As well. And Spokane's nuclear missiles, they can go 6,235 miles from here. And let me get a map and show you just where we can hit. Oh, it was something else. So here's a missile fully elevated and ready and loaded full of fuel. And they're on readiness. They not only have nuclear weapons, they have nuclear weapons that are triggered and engaged. They're ready to go. This, I find, as an American historian, one of the weirdest and most upsetting and unforgivable things of President Kennedy's office. And I like President Kennedy. You know, I think he did a lot of wonderful things. He did a lot of unforgivable things, and one was in the September 1961 issue of Life magazine, when it presented an open letter to the American people, in which President Kennedy said, the threat of a nuclear war in America is imminent. And I recommend as president that every family in America that can afford a nuclear bomb shelter build one. Now, how many families in America do you think can afford, or Spokane, can afford a nuclear bomb shelter in their backyard? This caused panic. My friend Mel Brown's right. This wasn't only in Spokane. There were other cities that have fixed like this. But this caused hysteria and panic in the city. In Spokane, immediately 6 construction companies grew up who specialized in home nuclear bomb shelters. And they sent, get this, they sent salesmen and women door to door to tell them about the threat and to sign them up and get a check, early check for the construction check for that as well. By September 16, 1966, Spokane had 222 bomb shelters within the city limits registered by the Civil Defense Authorities. And that's just those that were registered. Spokane began a fallout shelter program itself in 1961. It's important to know that the federal government never had a fallout shelter program, ever. Just for the honchos in Washington, D.C. and in NORAD in Colorado. They had nice bomb shelters, but forget it for anybody else. That's not the philosophy in Russia or China, who claim that they have fallout shelters public for everyone. But Spokane on its own, the city, is panicked. It starts public fallout shelters to augment that for people that can't provide their own. And the largest and most successful one's under the Episcopal Church. One is downtown under the Central Shopping Center there. Under Bon Marché, there is a huge nuclear fallout shelter built there that was said to house 12,000 people with supplies to outlast a nuclear holocaust there. The city's upset. The city's very upset. Now, in the late 1970s, the federal government said we're not recommending bomb shelters anymore. That's because of a belief in mutual assured destruction. You won't outlive them. Why try? Don't get your hopes up. But our FEMA, we know how good FEMA is, huh? FEMA still publishes from time to time broadsheets on what to expect in a nuclear war. And in their last sheet, I don't know the exact date from this, but it's certainly in our century here, FEMA put out a sheet that said, believe it or not, Spokane is still at the top of the nuclear bombing sites in World War III. Because why now? Because it has the largest KC-135 refueling dumps in the United States, if not the world. So our enemies want to get rid of that as well. And this ignorance from FEMA says, well, if we have a nuclear war, Spokane will be among the very first for a 500 bomb first attack. What are they talking about? 500, what are they talking about? Not 500 nuclear bombs, that would only take a little. There. And so the B-52s were finally taken. The last bomber left on May 25, 1994, and we're glad for that. Now the intercontinental ballistic missiles, there was so much national heat locating those missiles near civilian populations that by 1964 they were taken down and taken to some godforsaken place like Wyoming and North Dakota where nobody lives. And that's where they are today. But the 92nd Rare Refueling Wing at Fairchild Air Force Base, well, it continues to be nuclear certified. We don't know why, and why should we care? If we're on the list anyway of the gas stations that are going to be hit first. Now, I do want to mention this in closing, that Fairchild we have a lot of serial killers and mass murders in Spokane. I'm sorry if that depresses you, that is fact. As a matter of fact, I tell my tours and students that in terms of serial killers, Spokane leads the nation, number 2, of known documented serial killers in the state of Washington, that is. Led only by number 1, which is Virginia. And I explain, well, Virginia has Washington, D.C., so possibly some of those killings are justified. But Spokane, Washington State? Well, on June 20, 1994, we had an unbelievable thing here. Fairchild used to have a very fine hospital for its, not only for its airmen and airwomen, but also for their families as well, and veterans as well. It was an excellent facility. There were 2 psychologists there, Major Thomas Brigham and Captain Alan London, and they had decertified a airman for service, saying he's mentally unstable. You know, he can't be an airman. And they had sent him away from Fairchild, you know, discharged him, I guess with honorable discharge, but on mental grounds, you can't do this. Well, he came back. On June 20, 1994, he came back on the base with multiple weapons, and he shot and killed 8-year-old Christina McCarran and Anita Lindner within the hospital. After he shot and killed the 2 psychologists in their office, I guess trying to prove he wasn't mentally unstable. And then he seriously wounded an additional 23 airmen and civilians as he walked out of the hospital, randomly shooting people. This, I think, okay, this is America, that's just a shooting, right? We're used to this. But what I thought was remarkable is that there was an armed airman security soldier, airman, and he was standing, how long ago was it? He was 70 yards away, 70 yards, 210 feet away. He saw this killing, he saw this rape. He takes out a pistol and aims it at 210 feet away, and he shoots and gets him right in the head. He's dead. That's a miracle. That's more than a good shot. That's a miracle. That's a miracle. I personally believe, you know, and summing up real quick, Mel was here in 1971. The downtown area is a desert. It's a wasteland. In 1961, 10 years earlier, Spokane had serious problems. We had the nuclear war threat. We had the B-52 problems. We were told we were #1 on the hit list. And Spokane was losing population. It actually lost population in the polls of 1960. And it was losing population. Now, true, it had hideous environmental problems. Left over from World War I, the aluminum plants. It had polluted ground, soil, and water, and air. And the Spokane River was basically a stagnant ditch. No animals, no plants, and not one green thing in entire downtown Spokane. It was just a terrible, nasty place. In 1961, the most important thing, I think, in North American urban history happened here. Things were so bad, people were so frightened, young people were leaving, the population was declining, everyone was sick. At those times, you could sometimes, with an inversion, not be able to see the end of the block in downtown Spokane. The air pollution was so bad. It was horrible, it was terrible. In 1961, business communities got together. They're still around, some of those major, famous operations. We had the best mayor in Spokane's history, Mayor Faustin was the mayor. And they all got together in a series of meetings, and they came to an agreement, and it's called the Plan of Transformation. It's still around today. That if Spokane did not do something immediately, that it would cease to be a city within a decade. And what it agreed to do immediately was to completely transform its economic base into tourism and get rid of the railroads, get rid of the factories. I hope none of you live in Spokane Valley, but they were going to transfer them all to Spokane Valley, and move the railroads, and through a luck and a lot of intelligence and a lot of road miles and millions of dollars, the city had lost its tax base. It had no money to even function. And so who financed this transformation of Spokane that took 13 years, culminating in the great World's Fair of 1974, who financed that was the businesses. Was the businesses of Spokane. They got together. Now, you know, if you think about this, the organization Spokane Inc., it started during this period. Concerned businesses that wanted to save Spokane. I believe, in conclusion, yes, it was polluted, yes, it was losing population, terrible things of this nature. But the thing that really stimulated Spokane was that hysteria about Fairchild, about nuclear weapons, about the fact that it was on the bullseye, and slowly that disappeared. But I think that was a major, not the major, but a major influence in getting Spokane transferred to the beautiful touristic convention city, beautiful vacation spot, wedding spot that it is today. Thank you.
I've got a question for you, John. All right, not a question, state. All right, when the Air Force bases and the Army bases were being built and funding was provided for them, the Air Force bases and the Army bases would build their recreational facilities first, so that if they ran out of money to build the runways, they wouldn't have any problems getting it from Congress. The Navy was stupid in that they would build their piers first, and then when they ran out of money, they didn't have any money for recreational facilities.
That's very cynical coming from a submariner.
Also, I was on the NEST Nuclear Emergency Support Team for 20 years. So it gives you a lot of information about that kind of stuff.
Any other questions? Comments?
Yes. I'd like to ask Chet, do you know what are they doing with the empty nuclear silos that
I can
had
tell you that.
missiles?
Well, there's two types. There's subterranean and there's surface nuclear sites. The surface ones were sold around Spokane, sold to private parties, and there's some weird stories about people that moved in. Not a normal person buys a nuclear silo.
What about the subterranean?
They were all sold to private contractors, private individuals, and some of them are homes now, and some of them are open for tours.
But who knows what kind of subcontractors? What do they manufacture down there?
Oh,
Nothing.
That's non-operational.
It's just a
No, that's not
60-foot
so.
hole. It's a concrete 60-foot hole, 3 stories tall, and it was tested to make sure that there was no nuclear residual radiation left in it, and people built 3-story homes in these holes. There's a couple of them out by Sprague, one or two out by Davenport, one by Lakeland.
Did you have a question on the silo?
I was going to, I agree with Kevin. The houses are nice, the people are nice, they're farming.
Oh, yeah? Any other questions? Thank you.
Would you all help me thank him for this amazing talk?
I will say, I was stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base for about 13 years with the Air Force and the Guard. And Chet has done an amazing job of finding these pictures in this research, because a lot of this I didn't know when I was stationed there. And it reminds me, my first base was Davis-Monthan, where the U-2 was at. And I was freshly arrived at Davis-Monthan. I'd been there like 2 weeks, and I decided to go to Mount Lemmon. And up there at Mount Lemmon, I met a snowbird. And started talking to him, and he was telling me how many U-2s there were on base and how often they flew. And I'm going, that's all top secret information. How do you know that? And Chet just reminded me of that, how where did you get all these pictures? Where did you get this information? I mean, wow, this is stuff I didn't know. So Chet, we do have a little honor for you.
No comment to that question.
Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble, but you certainly amazed me that you got it. So, we try to recognize our speakers. If you're not a member of the Westerners and you speak, you get a couple of our Pacific Northwesterners. But if you are a member, you usually get a little Joe pin. And there's only about 25% of us here, I'm sure, that have spoken, and you don't get a pin until you have spoken in front of the group. In this case, Chet's not only spoken before, but he's also been a past sheriff. And so today I'm giving him a bolo of old Joe.
Remember how I lost my first one?
How was
That
that?
was when I was sheriff and unprepared for an evening like this, so the speaker could get to speak, and then I didn't have an old Joe pin, I didn't have a bolo tie, I just had the one I had on. And so I made a big deal about it, and we present you with this, I lost my tie.
There you go. So next month, the third Thursday of the month, Ty Brown, who's not here tonight, he just wrote a book on the Little Spokane River. It's called Little Spokane River, A Sense of Place. Story of the history, environment, families, and future of the Little Spokane River. And he's going to be speaking about the Little Spokane, one of the highest navigable in elevation rivers, and one of the few that's not dammed. That's in the United States as a river. So it's not a big river, but it has that unique sense of livelihood that it has not been dammed. Yeah.